Trey Gowdy joins us right now, the former South Carolina Congressman. I'm curious, Trey, when you look at, for example, another top issue besides the virus, the law and order issue. We've had 384 days straight of violence and uprisings going on in Portland. Similar scenarios that play out in Chicago and in Seattle. Very little about that issue that's a concern to a lot of Americans. Much about the protests themselves. I get that. I understand that. But it's as if some of the violence that we've been seeing, and there's been a lot of it, gets no mention. No support for law and order, no support for police. And I'm just wondering, would it kill them to have a speaker devoted to that?
No, and I think if you like contrast, and politics is about contrast, then you have it on vivid display, Neil. I mean, you've got a party that is unabashedly law and order, and we do need to reform the police, and we need a justice system that we can all have confidence in. But think about what's going to happen tonight. All right, a woman of color is going to be nominated for the vice presidency, to be one elusive moment away from the presidency. And yet, those on the left want to tear down the institutions that have supported this country for decades, and they want to set the country on fire. Those two, to most Americans, do not go together. You're going to have a black former president and a woman of color who's a nominee to be one heartbeat away. And yet the left wants us to believe that we need to disassemble the institutions of this country and set it on fire. And for most Americans, that is a disconnect.
You know, much has been said and will be said about the fact that, the president gets in his own way, his own messaging, his own, prompts that he creates for himself, and that Joe Biden will be Mr. Steady and Mr. Reliable. You can count on him. So there is much talking about style versus necessarily the substance of the job. I'm just wondering how that resonates. If you believe the polls, and I understand methodologies and all, they could be wrong, that they reflect that Americans maybe want that after some of the drama associated with Donald Trump. Conversely, there are many who look at the same polls and say, well, a lot of people are not saying that they really support Donald Trump because they're afraid how that will look to their colleagues and friends. And I'm just wondering how that translates when Republicans gather next week.
Well, if they're looking for an alternative that is clear-spoken, then Joe Biden is not going to be the person that they pick. I mean, Joe Biden has a half a century's worth of gaffes. I mean, he said of President Obama, he's the first mainstream candidate that is clean and articulate. He said some really curious things racially about segregationists. So if you're looking for William F. Buckley Jr. on the other side, that ain't Joe Biden. Having said that, I'll tell you what I've told the president himself. I think people care about what you believe and what your policies are, but it also matters the manner in which you communicate that. And he's admitted that. I mean, I think 2 weeks ago, he said, look, I wish I had some tweets back. I wish I had some retweets back. I would continue to focus on your policy and pay attention to the manner in which we communicate, and do so in a persuasive way, particularly for those constituencies that want to see compassion and empathy.
Real quickly, Trey, we've seen it pick up in economic activity. Now, the question is it enough time for people to feel that, sense that, and vote on that? I'm talking about what's been going on in the housing industry. We've seen a boom in housing activity. We've certainly seen retail sales pick up, take autos out of the equation. They're off to the races, the best they've been in years. The markets, they're their own comeback story with the Dow and the S&P and the NASDAQ, at least the latter two, racing to all-time highs this week. And yet, the argument seems to be that this is an economic disaster. Is it your sense that Republicans next week pound that to counter the image we're going to hell in the handbasket, because Democrats are saying those market gains are just for the rich and we're going to tax them, and the economic gains are paltry because we still have tens of millions of Americans out of work, despite the 9 or 10 million we've gained back in the last few months? How do they handle that?
Well, I think the fortunes of all Americans are tied to an improved economy. And if this presidential race is on the economy, and it's not on on COVID and the deaths, then Republicans are going to do very, very well. I mean, the message is simple. You should trust the guy who built the world's greatest economy to rebuild it. I just don't think my fellow Americans are going to blame Donald Trump for an unprecedented pandemic. I mean, the word unprecedented means something. It means it ain't ever happened before. So we were doing great until this hit. We had to intentionally turn off our economy. If this is a race about who can start the economy back up again, I think they're going to pick Donald Trump and not a guy with, a half century in the Senate whose number one accomplishment was to imprison a generation of African-American males with his crime bill.
All right, the one that he supported Bill Clinton on. All right, Congress, we'll see what happens. It's always great catching up with you, my friend.